Hollow Knight is a 2017 video game developed by Australian indie game studio Team Cherry. Over the years, it has reached a massive audience and has become one of the best-selling indie games in the world, sitting at a confirmed 2.8 million sales as of 2019 and an estimated 21 million sales as of July 2023. Hollow Knight has received numerous awards due to its incredible gameplay, atmosphere, art, writing, and music. I'm going to be honest for a second and say that when I first played Hollow Knight, I didn't enjoy it. The game at a glance was very overwhelming due to a lack of guidance, and the first few areas were quite bland. I did drop the game for a brief period, but would soon have some close friends urge me to try it again, to which I agreed. And oh boy am I so glad that I did. After pushing through the first part of the game, I was met with so much more than I could have imagined, and was instantly entranced by the world before me. I loved everything. The atmosphere, the characters, the combat, the exploration, the art, and especially the music. The game's soundtrack, composed by Christopher Larkin, is my personal favourite part of the entire experience, and what really got me hooked. Today, I want to take a deeper look at it. What makes the music of Hollow Knight what it is?
Bapanada.
First things first, who is Christopher Larkin? Christopher Larkin is an Australian composer and sound designer who has been doing work on film, television, and video games for around 12 years. After discovering improvisation at the piano and music software on the computer in his early teens, he was able to begin exploring the medium of music making as an exciting creative process. He transferred to Brighton High School in Year 12 to study specialist music, and straight after began his compositional studies at the Elder Conservatorium of Music in Adelaide. While his studies transported him to the world of classical and contemporary classical music, he maintained a strong connection to electronic music, progressive rock, and video game scores. In 2017, a video titled Hollow Knight Soundtrack Interview was published on Larkin's YouTube channel. In this video, he states that he's had an interest in composing for games since a young age.
My very first game was actually one by myself when I was in my teen years, about 13 years old. I was making a platformer called Blue Goopy. It's basically, all the art was done in paint. It's basically Mario, but a completely different art style.
During November of 2014, the Kickstarter page for Hollow Knight would go live. This is how Christopher Larkin would discover the game and come to compose for it. In a 2017 interview with Adelaide-based radio show Pixels Rising, he would state that
there was quite a bit of interest from a few different composers when the Kickstarter went up and it was in the process of getting funded. I was lucky in the sense that I knew Ari Gibson and his partner Makoto Koji. I did music and sound for one of her films, and that was kind of, I guess, a way to show her and also the team what I was capable of doing, and I also wrote some sketches early on for Team Cherry before the gig was confirmed, and that also helped me get over the line.
After Team Cherry had seen what he was capable of, Larkin would be hired on to compose Hollow Knight's soundtrack. The score that Christopher Larkin has created to fit the ancient and decaying kingdom of Hallownest is, in my opinion, the final and most important step to fully immersing a player in the game's world and narrative. Team Cherry knew how important good music and sound design was for their world to thrive, or, I guess, feel lonely.
But with working with Team Cherry, they're really great to work with, and like I mentioned before, we'll get together and we'll have a look at the game and discuss it, and they actually gave me this Word document early on, which was a treatment of the game, which sort of gave me an idea of what the world is like. And one thing that we kept coming back to was that the music should give a sense of a kingdom that's fallen to ruin. And so what the music is doing is I guess in a general sense it's giving hints on what the world used to be like, but also the emotion of melancholy and loss of what it's now become.
While solid communication with Team Cherry was crucial to writing a fitting soundtrack, Christopher Larkin is also just a bloody good composer. To the average player, the music just works, but there's a lot more than you might think going on beneath the surface, and a great example of this is Leitmotifs.
And I'm really grateful for this. Team Cherry have been very supportive of the idea of using themes and melodies, and in film and opera, there's this term that goes around a lot called Leitmotif, and the Leitmotif is a short melodic phrase that gets attached to certain places or things, and when these places or things come back later in the game, you hear that melody again.
Leitmotifs are also a very easy way for the composers to strengthen, even if only subconsciously, certain narrative ties within the media they are composing for. And there are a lot of great examples of this throughout Hollow Knight's music. One of the earliest to be introduced and also the most prominent leitmotif can be heard right here, in the music for the game's main menu. The piece, fittingly titled Hollow Knight, introduces the player to the following short melodic phrase. The Hollow Knight leitmotif can be heard constantly throughout the game, in area themes, boss battles, and cutscenes. To me, this short phrase sounds quite mysterious and a bit melancholic, while also being extremely simple. The simplicity of leitmotifs allow them to be shaped around different songs within the soundtrack, while also keeping their identity. Take the Green Path theme for example. Right here, that's the same leitmotif. It can also be heard here, here, here again, and of course when you're up against the final boss itself. Now remember what Christopher Larkin said, a leitmotif
Gets attached to certain places or things.
So let's establish what this one is tied to. The Hollow Knight leitmotif is tied to vessels. A quick story dive for those who haven't played Hollow Knight. This little guy you play as is not the Hollow Knight. The Hollow Knight is actually this guy, the final boss of the game. But notice how similar they are in appearance? Well, they're actually siblings. What both the player and the Hollow Knight are is a vessel made by a former king of Hallownest. The purpose of these vessels was to seal and stop the infection that you see throughout the game spreading further into the kingdom. There's a lot more to the story, and trying to fit all of it in here would take way too long, so I'll leave it at that. If you do want to learn more though, there are plenty of videos online. I would recommend The Mostly Complete Lore of Hollow Knight by Mossbag. Anyways, we've established that the leitmotif is tied to these vessels, and should appear when they do. Take for example the Broken Vessel boss fight. During this fight you're up against a reanimated vessel overrun with the infection. This seems to be a very fitting place for the leitmotif to appear, and it does. Here we can hear the same tune, but this time stretched out to cover more bars and played over an angry but rhythmic chord pattern. This makes the theme sound a lot more scary and intense, which is perfect for a boss fight. Now, Broken Vessel is, well, very clearly a vessel, so it makes sense for our Hollow Knight leitmotif to show up. But what about these other times that it shows up, like during the False Knight fight, or the area themes? Those things aren't vessels, right? Well, not like these guys are. Let's bring back the boss, False Knight, and I'll show you these guys too, the Watcher Knights. You can hear the same leitmotif in both of their tracks, but why? Well, as pointed out by the channel 8-Bit Music Theory, who has already done a whole video on leitmotifs in Hollow Knight.
The False Knight theme doesn't just play over the False Knight boss fight, but one other boss fight as well, the Watcher Knights. Neither of these bosses are vessels, but they're both empty suits of armor being manipulated by a separate party, a wimpy grub and these infected flies respectively. This makes them quite literally Hollow Knights.
8-Bit Music Theory also covers the leitmotif being used in area themes, saying that
the Hollow Knight leitmotif is used a couple times throughout the environment music, which I attribute to us following around the main character through these environments.
I personally think that it's because each area is kind of a vessel in its own way too. Each area is a subsection of the kingdom, a vessel that hosts unique inhabitants and environments. This theory is also a bit of a stretch though. One thing that the area themes are a perfect example for though, is how Christopher Larkin uses certain instruments to create a specific feeling or atmosphere. Let's take a closer listen to the Fungal Waste theme playing right now. The music here uses a lot of strings. but instead of them being long, drawn out and melancholic like some other places in the game, they are plucked, which creates a very bouncy and playful feeling. This is very intentional and perfect for this area with its silly looking enemies and bouncy mushrooms. Another example of great instrumentation and leitmotifs is found in my personal favourite area theme, the City of Tears, and its sub-area, Soul Sanctum. This area is definitely the one that gives me the most Kingdom Fallen to Ruin vibes, and it's done perfectly. As you enter the area, you can hear the rain, and then the music starts to play with a beautiful harp arrangement. This alone sounds incredible, but as soon as you step out into the open, the music swells into this. A single voice provided by singer Amelia Jones carries the piece to another level. I think that this composition does a few things exceptionally well. The way the music swells and becomes this great orchestral piece is a great way of conveying the size of the city. It is, after all, the biggest area in the game and the former capital of the now decaying kingdom. The lone voice that is used within this piece of music makes it sound welcoming, but also invokes a sense of sadness and loss at the same time. To me, it feels like that singular voice is what's left of a choir. The city used to be grand, and a choir could be used to convey this. But now, it's fallen apart, and only infected bugs roam its pathways. The glory of what once was the kingdom's capital has now faded, and only one voice can preach what it used to be. Okay, so I listened to this piece again, and there is actually a choir, which I didn't notice the first time, but I think this is still a sound theory. The choir, while yes it is there, sounds rather ghostly or even hollow, but the main voice feels real and tangible, and this is definitely the case, as you can find the NPC Marissa, who is actually singing the vocal arrangement. Now let's continue on to the Soul Sanctum. The Soul Sanctum, the sub-area within the City of Tears, greets you with this haunting arrangement when you enter. It sounds quite different to the city's music, but if we take a closer listen. This part right here is the same melody sung in the city, except now it's being played on a pipe organ and in a minor key. Because it has the same melodic phrase, it sounds familiar, but both the choice of instruments and the chord change makes this piece sound even more tragic than before. The organ is a very dark and depressing instrument, because we usually associate it with funerals. Christopher Larkin then uses that underlying psychological element to add to the story, which the music is portraying. In the case of this area, an organ is very fitting for the story, which is quite dark, and I'll briefly explain it here. The Soul Sanctum used to be run by scientific scholars who, when the infection broke out, tried to use an energy source called soul to achieve a pure mind, which in turn would make them immune to being infected. However, soul is, well, basically what it sounds like. It is the life force of the bugs in Hallownest. See, when you strike an enemy, you gain some soul. So to collect enough soul, they, just look around at the background in this area. Yeah, thousands of bugs were killed. Anyway, due to high exposure to soul, the scholars were driven mad and were unable to achieve the pure focus, eventually succumbing to the infection themselves. The Soul Sanctum is a grave, and the organ that plays is a way of indicating this to the player. Instruments being used like this is a crucial way to add storytelling into a piece. Larkin in the past has called this textural themes. Okay, so textural themes and leitmotifs. That's what we've covered today. And now I want to take these things that we've talked about and hop into Ableton Live and compose my own piece using what I've talked about, and also just based on the general feel of Hollow Knight. I hope you enjoy. Okay, so here we are in Ableton. Okay, so I'm gonna take some of the stuff I've talked about in the video, and I'm gonna be using Ableton for this. I'm gonna make my own original piece inspired by Christopher Larkin's music, using what we've talked about in the video. So I'm gonna use some motifs from Hollow Knight to help enforce that Hollow Knight feel, and also the textural themes that we talked about just before. I've decided that what I'm going to do is I want to take one of the areas from the game that doesn't have its own music track. So it's either got repurposed music, a remix, so like Fog Canyon has a remix of Green Path, or a place that's just, you know, completely silent. And I was thinking my original pick was going to be Howling Cliffs, because that's an entire part of the game that doesn't have its own music. The same goes for the Ancient Basin, but I think both of those areas, it's very fitting to not have music. And it's not like this is going into the game, so it doesn't matter if I did make a track for them. But I decided I would do a subsection, so a named subsection. So I'm going to be composing a piece for Isma's Grove, and I think it definitely deserves its own track. So I'm going to try and make one. It's also probably going to be a very small, very short song as well. Alright, so I think the way that I'm going to do this is I'm just going to kind of do it like this. I'm going to time-lapse the entire thing, because I basically have 4 hours worth of footage of me composing, and sitting here 3 hours and 22 minutes away from Silksong releasing, it's a little bit overwhelming to look at and to think about editing. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the reason why I am going to do certain things that you will hear in the track when I play it for you. So, as I said, this piece is for Isma's Grove, which is a subsection of the Royal Waterways under the City of Tears, and Isma was one of the great knights for the Pale King, who I mentioned earlier. Now, Isma was in love with another one of the great knights for the Pale King, Ogrim, who we know during Hollow Knight as the Dung Defender. The lore of Hollow Knight doesn't really touch on it, but obviously stuff has happened and time has passed, and Isma now appears to be dead. It's this sort of tree-like figure that you can find in Isma's Grove. You can actually dream nail her and get this dialogue that says, "Ogrim, there's no time." So there's definitely a connection between Isma and the Dung Defender, and what I'm doing here is, you can see me, I actually had to restart, but I'm going to be taking the sort of theme that is associated, I didn't get to cover it unfortunately, but the theme that is associated with the Pale King and the Pale Court and the Great Knights, which is very clearly displayed in the White Lady's theme, which I'll play a snippet of here for you now. So I'm going to be taking this theme and then kind of combining it with the theme for Dung Defender. So then you have both those elements of the connection to the Pale Court and the connection to the Dung Defender, and it also gives me a nice basis, and we get to use those leitmotifs like I was talking about. I was a little bit unsure about where to go, and obviously I am not Christopher Larkin, so it's not going to sound exactly like his music, and I think I like that because then it has sort of my own stamp on it, my own sort of ideas that I put into it, but it also does certainly have a Hollow Knight vibe to it with the choice of instruments and the themes, or I should say leitmotifs. So I'll actually play this melody quickly that I managed to sort of create here. Yeah, I think that's nice. This was the first real attempt where I decided that I was going to do the sort of Dung Defender theme in the style of the, White Palace and the White Lady. So it's quite amateur, and it does evolve a lot over the course of the time-lapse. I kind of edit it and play around with how it's played and making it fit nicer in with the other instruments. I'm also still very new to Ableton Live, but the main thing is I was having fun, and it was a lot of fun to do this. I think it's always good for me to hone my skills as a composer and to try out little projects like this. And then you guys can, you know, see an example of how what I'm talking about in the video actually works. It's not just, you know, this sort of information that goes in one ear and goes out the other. You can actually see how it is utilized in music. So I think here I'm going to play for you the first time I really start to develop that theme, that main melody for the piece, and I'm quite proud of how it came together. Okay, I got it. This took me a while to figure out, but I think it sounds really nice. Sounds really nice. Okay, so I'm gonna keep on going. So originally I was unsure. I was maybe thinking about putting in the Royal Waterways ambience that you can hear, but I didn't end up going for that. It's just a very low bass progression on a double bass, I think, or might be just a really low cello. But I didn't end up going for that, and instead I wanted sort of more vibrant cello, similar to something you might hear in a greener area like Queen's Gardens or Greenpath, because I feel like Isma's Grove has that sort of same feeling to it. You know, it's a very green and lush area in such a barren place. Another thing that I tried to play around with was I wanted a flute, but funnily enough, Ableton did not have a preset just standard flute. The closest thing that I could find was this Indian flute, and it does make it into the final cut, but it's very kind of subtle. But I think if I'd had more time, I would love, and maybe in the future I'll do this with Silksong, just a few hours away. I'd love to hear how Christopher Larkin's music has evolved in that and grown, and you know, maybe once I've honed my skills a bit more, I can come back and do an analysis video on Silksong and, you know, try and make a bigger and more orchestral piece. Because yeah, this one did turn out pretty simple, but that was the goal, and I'm happy with how it turned out. You know, it's not the best, but for, you know, a kid sitting in his room just playing around, teaching himself how to do this, I would say I've done a good job. As I said, it's just been a solo project for me for 4 months. I've put a lot of effort into this, so supporting me would mean a lot. Liking and subscribing and all that stuff. I don't like asking for it, but it's what helps me out. You know, share it with your friends and family, and I hope you enjoyed the video and that you liked the music and you liked the analysis, and I hope to see you again for future videos. Thank you very much. Bye.